CBC is trying to figure out whether there's this set of modeling, and I think you had some interactions with these guys, the Scarson people. So,
Yeah.
these guys are using like 90 variables to like come up with their graphs, and they take a lot of issue with the fact that, and today we saw this again with the federal modeling, that every graph that the province and the Fed show, it has this line that's going straight up, which is never reality because usually, health
Right.
measures and lockdowns and stuff come in. So I had proposed, like, one of the things that came up, and I think today, because Davila and Lowe had been talking about extend the lockdown in Peel and in Toronto, and I said, well, I wonder if at any point, like, the hardest part is nobody can see into the future and exactly what's going to happen. But the fact is we're coming on the third wave of this. It's not the first, it's not the second. We're now staring down the third, and there are vaccines coming. I'm like, there have to be some lessons learned. I'm like just a layperson here who's just reading every bit of
Yeah.
crap that comes across everything. I'm like, wouldn't it make more sense at this point if someone could model it for us? How long would we need to pull this lockdown or this stay-at-home order out in order to prevent what would be a third
Right.
lockdown?
Right.
And so I wanted to get your sense. Is that
Yeah.
something that
Yeah, it's probably possible, if that's a phrase, probably possible. Here's the thing with models in general. This is true for all mathematics. It's really easy to model the present. It's really easy to predict the present. And the better you are predicting the present, the less able you are to predict the future. So I can use Fourier transforms and power series and any number of fancy mathematics to create a curve that goes through every single data point of the present you give me. But that's not useful because I can't extrapolate that into the future. So the art of this is deciding which variables are relevant for the future. Right? Having said that, there is something to be said for a richness in variables and using statistical techniques to determine which parsimonious set of variables are most relevant, and also having a regional approach. So creating separate models for each public health unit, for example. And we sort of do that already. So David Fisman had donated his IDEA model, IDEA, the incremental decay and exponential adjustment model, I think it's called, to the various public health units of Ontario. You can go to the IDEA website, and each public health unit does its own modeling. So that's being done at a certain level. The beauty of the Scarson approach is you can shove in various interventions, like we anticipate vaccine uptake to be this amount, and we anticipate the
yeah.
vaccine efficacy levels to be this amount, and mask wearing will be this amount, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even having said that, the type of models kind of matter. So they use what's called an SEIR approach, a susceptibility, exposure, infection, and recovery model, which is essentially looking at it like physical pools of fluid flowing into each other. We start out with a 100% susceptible population, and as infection happens, that population gets smaller, and the infection population rises, and then the recovered population rises, and so the flow of fluids. And so these curves really just resemble the flow curves of fluids through these compartments. And you throw in another compartment of vaccinated, another compartment of mask wearing, and model it that way. Is that real life? Not really, but that's kind of what we use for everything in medicine, really. Whether it's the distribution of an injected drug into your body, that's modeled the same way. It's close enough, though. I mean, it's been used throughout all of pandemic history to figure these things out. So, to answer your larger question, though, is it possible to use modeling in a more sensitive way to make more nuanced and minute control decisions locally? I think it is. What it takes is uh, political will, resources, and consensus among the experts about which are the variables most relevant to make those decisions.
Can you, just off the top of your head, are there some that you feel would have to be in there? Like, which variables do you feel like, well, we got to know this, and who have any level of confidence we'd have to know this?
We have to know, obviously, the R, things like the dynamics of the virus itself, we need to know. Things like its hospitalization rate and its case fatality rate and its infection rate. We need to know the mitigation tools at play, mask wearing, distancing, vaccination, and the degree of uptake they have, and also how much they change the rate of flow of people from these compartments. That's estimated, you know. And we need to probably know the dynamics of the population, the age distribution, susceptibility, like pre-existing comorbidities and things like that. And also, we need to be clear what question we're answering here. Is the question what the trajectory of the pandemic is? Is the question at what point do we oversaturate our hospital system? Is the question at what point do we have an unacceptable level of deaths? You know, those are those are different questions that mandate different approaches and different kinds of models that we care about, and different decision making too. So largely, it's been unclear across the entire country what the goal of our pandemic plan is. Is it zero infections? Is it zero deaths? Is it minimal hospitalization? It started out being let's not overload the hospital system. Then it became let's not get
Hmm.
anybody infected. I don't know what the right answer is, but there's been lack of clarity in what the point of it all is, right? So it
Maybe
all
depending
begins,
where you are.
yeah, exactly. So it begins from first principles. What are you trying to do? Yeah,
Yeah.
and that never been
Okay.
answered.
So let me ask you this: if we were to ask the Scarson people to give us a few looks into the future, depending on like a reasonable set of variables, what would you want to see? Like, what would you be curious to know, or do you feel like we've already seen what we need to see?
Of course, you want to know is what can I get away with? That's really what people want to know. What can I get away with? Yeah. What can I keep open? What parties can I attend? What activities can I do and not put population health at risk? Let's be blunt.
Okay.
That's all we care about.
Yeah. Absolutely. So in terms of timeline, I mean, see, I feel like right now is today I was listening to the PHAC news conference and I felt like those were the strongest terms I've ever really heard Teresa Tam use, and that's a very wide scale
Yeah.
that's happening. And I had some of my colleagues sort of like, like what is she saying? Like, why is she all up in arms now? Like, blah. And I was like, but you know what? I think it kind of does make sense at this juncture that she's kind of trying to say everything is starting to look better. And now
Yeah.
everybody, like, if you watch what happening in Alberta and what Doug Ford is trying to do too, right? I think they're just like, we could actually grab onto something good. And if we, even if they make it to what the feds were saying, that we'll have all those priority groups vaccinated by the end of first quarter,
Mhm.
that's the end of March. It's like within
Within
reach,
reach.
right? It's
Yep.
like, but I think they see it slipping away.
Yes. This is the analogy I made earlier today is this is in the movie terms the third act. In the third act, this is when you fight the big boss, right? So the big boss is the third wave. And we're in that interact period where the heroes are writing to their loved ones and having deep thoughts and really assessing what matters to them in life before the big battle, knowing a few of them aren't going to make it. So the movie is almost over. We're almost done. But this final battle has to take place. So this is the time for the generals to have their no nonsense motivational speech to the troops. This is exactly where we are. Now, is it possible that we'll lose the final match? No, we're going to win the final match. Whether we win messily or cleanly is the question. So this is where we are, and I think it would be nice if we sold that to the public, say, look, we're almost done. We have this one last battle to fight. We're actually through the worst of it, to be honest, probably. It's just like by June, it's going to be clear sailing the summer on, you know. But just gotta just bear with us for a little longer.
Kinda.
Yeah,
And that's, yeah. I mean, that's the narrative that I see too. And so I had pushed for like, well, why don't we start to frame it that way,
yeah.
right? Like this is it, man. We can determine what's going to happen in the next few months right now. Like what happens in these next like almost like 4 weeks will determine like the
That's
next
right.
couple months.
Every great epic has
But
the final battle in the third act, and then the denouement is picking up the pieces and tracking down the scragglers and planning and making sure that justice is served and the Nuremberg trials happen and all the great things. So we'll have the dissection afterwards. We'll have plenty of time for that and to
yeah,
rethink our decisions. Let's fight the final battle
yeah. Something very poetic in there, Raywat.
somewhere.
All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm going to tell them that we'll move forward with this and kind of start to look at some of these other variables. Hopefully, I can touch base with you next week
Sure.
and just do an interview that's will form the basis of sort of where we're going with this.
Cool. No problem. Okay.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye bye.